We are now more than a quarter of the way through the 24-25 NBA season, and while it is still early to be drawing sweeping conclusions and making declarations of the fate of a given team or player, there have been a lot of unexpected surprises and disappointments in the early going of the season, some of which we would be shocked to know by at the start of this season had anyone given us a glimpse into the future. And so in this video, we're going to be going over some of the biggest surprises or surprise storylines, as well as some of the biggest disappointments to kick off the season. As always, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to help the channel grow, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, in every season there are always going to be those surprises, unexpected performances, whether good or bad, by a particular team or player, and just like every season we always have the expected, the given, such as the Boston Celtics looking poised to repeat as champions as the best team in the league, the Oklahoma City Thunder still looking like the best team in the Western Conference and building on their success from last season, especially with all their offseason moves to further bolster their roster, the Wizards being the Wizards sitting at the bottom of the standings and poised to get another top lottery pick, Nikola Jokic being just as dominant as ever and primed to win the MVP award yet again. But for the most part, I would say there have been more unexpected results in the early going of the season than those that were expected. Even just going based on my preseason standing predictions for each conference, as well as the projections of various media outlets, odds makers for win-loss totals, it's clear a lot of us have gotten it wrong in the early going. One of the bigger surprises has to be the incredible start to the season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, who kicked off their year going 15-0. Now, we knew the Cavs would be a good team and a top team in the Eastern Conference with the amount of talent they have on their roster, but no one would have expected them to come out of the gate in the manner they have, looking like the best offense we have seen in years. The guys, for the most part, are fully healthy and firing on all cylinders. Evan Mobley has looked great and having a much better than expected start to his season, improving all of his doubters wrong about him getting that rookie max contract extension. Darius Garland has looked considerably better than what we saw last year, healthy and playing like his former All-Star season. And of course, Donovan Mitchell having a stellar start to his year. But what has been surprising to me most when looking at this Cavs team is just how efficient they have been on offense. They're shooting the ball at an insane 51% from the field, which ranks first in the NBA, well above league average at 46%, which I know doesn't sound like much, but 5% above league average at the level of volume you see shots going up these days is substantial. They're also the best three-point shooting team in the league by percentage at 40.5% compared to the league average at 36%. And it's not like they're taking all their shots inside to help with these field goal percentage numbers. No, they still rank 12th in the league in three-point volume, with 42% of their overall attempts coming from deep. And then, of course, they lead the league in true shooting percentage at a ridiculous 62%. The Cavs thus far have been one of the most efficient offenses we have seen in NBA history. Now, will it sustain over time? Well, time will tell, but in the early going, no one could have expected the Cavs offense to be this good. Some other surprises: who thought the Brooklyn Nets would be as good as they've been? Not saying that they're good, but better than expected when most thought they would be in the tank for flag sweepstakes, one of the worst teams right out of the gate, along with the Washington Wizards. A lot of guys on their roster are playing with massive chips on their shoulders, looking for contracts and not looking to be part of a tanking team, and it's led to the Nets being a team that has surprised their opponents, thinking they could just come into Brooklyn and automatically walk out with a W. I do think the Nets will eventually start trading off their most valuable assets like Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Schroeder, and yes, even Cam Thomas, just to ensure they get the highest pick possible going into this draft as they commence on their rebuild. Another surprise has to be the two teams that are already well ahead of schedule in their rebuilding process, that being the Houston Rockets and the San Antonio Spurs. I'll start with the Rockets because while I know some expected them to be good just based on how much we had seen them progress as a team under Ime Udoka last season, as well as the emergence of Şengün and Jalen Green, but I'll be real, I still thought with how stacked the Western Conference is, I didn't expect to see the Rockets be any better than being a play-in team at best, but second in the Western Conference right now, and beating contending teams in convincing fashion. Nah, they have been way better than expected and play with grit and grind that a lot of teams really struggle against. That team is legit. And then the Spurs, we were all expecting this team to be better than they were last year with Victor Wembanyama going into his second season, but let's be honest, we figured this would be another tanking year, so to speak, to really further cement their rebuild by attaining another top pick in a stacked draft class. This to go along with the picks that are owed to them from the Atlanta Hawks, unprotected, the Bulls, which is top 10 protected, and the Hornets, that's lottery protected. But the Spurs, 20 games into the season, are sitting above 500 and have a legitimate shot at making the playoffs based on how they've been playing thus far, and Wemby playing out of his mind with some mind-boggling numbers for a second-year player at just the age of 20. The Spurs are very much ahead of schedule and could very well make it challenging for a team like the Sacramento Kings, as an example, to be on the outside looking in come the postseason. Initially, I had the Warriors also as a surprise, and they still have been a surprise to an extent. I think most people expected their time was over, given what we saw last year, and that they likely would not make the playoffs yet again this season, but they've kicked off the season well, better than expected, but more recently, they've cooled off a bit and seem to be regressing to the mean. The Orlando Magic, they've been a big surprise, not so much in the fact that they've been great and at the top of the Eastern Conference, but more so a surprise in doing all of this without their star in Paolo Banchero, who's been out for most of the season thus far. That said, their schedule has been pretty light, so we'll see if that sustains. But one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, and you have Paolo coming back soon, they're going to be scary for the remainder of this year. Now, as far as disappointments go, of course, we have to start with the Philadelphia 76ers. I already made a video on this team, so I won't reiterate that point too much here. But when you go all in over the offseason by handing over a 4-year max contract to Paul George at the age of 34 with his injury history. And yes, I know they've gone through their fair share of injuries to all of their best players so far this season, but even when they have been healthy, they haven't looked great. But the Sixers starting out the year 4-14 at the time of this recording with a huge hill to climb coming out of that hole is not something we would have expected from a team with title aspirations to start the season. Other disappointments, you have to say the Indiana Pacers, more specifically Tyrese Haliburton. After that insane run Haliburton had to start the season last year, leading the Pacers to one of the greatest offenses in NBA history, people were talking about Haliburton becoming a superstar in this league with his ascendance and showing up as a leader. But then he got injured and was sidelined for some time, although he did return. He just hasn't looked like the same player since, and it's been very concerning just how poorly he shot the ball. His finishing at the rim isn't what it used to be. His energy, speed, hustle has somehow seemed to regress, and you can tell in his body language that something doesn't seem right. Now, I know for the Pacers, this isn't all on Tyrese Haliburton. They also made a big investment in Pascal Siakam by trading 3 first-round picks to get him, as well as extending him to a max deal, but Haliburton is their player for the future, their leader, and a guy who you just gave a near $250 million max contract to. Simply put, he has to be better. And for the Pacers overall, for a team that went to the conference finals, had made these all-in moves to land Siakam, extending Obi Toppin, Nesmith, Nembhard, with all of the salary you have committed on your books, and now limited draft capital, you have to be better than just sitting in the play-in territory in the East. I mentioned this team earlier on in the video about how disappointing have the Sacramento Kings been in their lackluster start to the season. This was a team that just 2 seasons ago finally looked like they were going to be on the up and up. They finished 3rd in the West. They just unfortunately ran into a more experienced team in the Warriors, but still gave them a run for their money, taking that series to 7 games. But at that time, it looked like the Kings had an incredible future with their budding young core and flexibility on their cap sheet, to then following that up, finishing 9th in the West and missing out on the playoffs by getting knocked out of the play-in. And because of that disappointing season, the Kings knew they really needed to add another star and experienced veteran to help this young group. They bring in DeMar DeRozan, who I love as a Bulls fan, but so far, early returns have not been great. And in fact, the Kings have regressed even further from last year. Their overall offense has slowed. They no longer are shooting threes at a high rate, which got them to where they were 2 seasons ago. They're one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the league. Their defense still remains subpar. They don't move the ball well. They don't rebound particularly well. And like I mentioned before, with the rise in teams like the Rockets, the Spurs, as well as the Grizzlies, who have obviously recovered from their injury-riddled season last year, you have 3 teams that didn't make the play-in last season that all project to make it this year. And so there is a world where the Kings don't even make the play-in at the rate they're playing, which would be a disaster given this team's history and where they are currently trying to win now. Some other disappointments, the same thing can be said for the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are falling well short of expectations based on how well they played last year, finishing at the top of the West and going to the conference finals for only the 2nd time in their franchise's history. I said before, even though I'm not a Cat fan and wouldn't say he was a player you had to keep, but sometimes you just don't mess with team chemistry and dynamics when things are working. Don't try and fix what isn't broken. I would even add the Denver Nuggets being a little disappointing given their desire to win a championship and having the best player in the league, but I do think they will eventually figure it out. Oh, and the Pelicans, while it's obviously been a disappointing start to their year, you also can't be too surprised given the amount of injuries they've gone through in the early going of the season, which is why I think it's time that they move on from Zion Williamson, which I actually talked about in my last video. You can check that out in case you missed it. But let me know what you guys think. What do you think have been some of the biggest surprises and disappointments to start the season? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.